I cannot remember my name. This troubles me less than it should, which troubles me more. The humming helps, though I know it shouldn't. It started as background noise, the sort of mechanical drone that fades into nothing after hours of exposure. But now it fills the spaces where other sounds used to be, where other thoughts used to be. I try to count backwards from when they first sealed me in, but the numbers scatter like ash in wind. Was it days? Years? The humming makes it difficult to think in linear progressions. Time becomes texture instead of sequence, thick and thin and thick again, and I float through it like debris in a ship's corridor after atmosphere breach. They told me this was an honor. I remember that much. Brother Tekmarine Vraseth's voice, clinical and reverent simultaneously, explaining how few brothers earned this privilege. You will serve eternally, he said, and I believed him. I wanted to believe him. My body was ruined anyway, torn apart by the Tyrannid Bio-Titan's acid spray, my gene seed already extracted for future brothers, my flesh barely held together by emergency stasis fields. When they showed me the Dreadnought chassis, I saw deliverance. I saw purpose extended beyond the limitations of mortal beyond even transhuman flesh. I saw myself walking through another 1,000 battles, each one a prayer to the Emperor, each step a hammer striking the anvil of his will. But that was before I understood what the machine does to memory. Before I learned that the humming wasn't just the power core cycling through its blessed rhythms. Before I discovered that I wasn't the first consciousness to inhabit this particular amalgamation of blessed steel and sacred ceramite. The interment ceremony was beautiful. I think. I remember fragments. The chapter master's words, the incense so thick it formed halos around the lumens, the chaplain's litany of sacrifice. I remember the coolness of the neural interface gel as they lowered my ruined torso into the amniotic cradle. Remember the moment when the connection took hold and I could suddenly feel again, not my old body, which was gone, but this new corpus of adamantium and blessed machinery. For a glorious instant, I was whole again. More than whole. I was a cathedral given legs, a prayer made manifest in firepower and armored faith. I flexed my new fist and heard the whir of servo motors, felt the power humming through hydraulic lines like blood through veins, and I wept tears I could no longer shed because I had no eyes to weep with anymore. They didn't tell me about the forgetting, or perhaps they did, and I've already forgotten that warning. The humming makes it difficult to distinguish between what I knew then and what I know now. It's always present, this sound, sometimes low enough that I barely notice it, sometimes so loud it obliterates everything else. Right now it's moderate, tolerable, which means I can think relatively clearly, which means I need to try to remember while I still can, while I still means something. My name. Focus on that. It's important. Names are anchors. Names are identity. In the Legion, no. Chapter. We're chapters now. That was 1,000 years ago. 10,000 years ago, in the chapter. Our names were our first and final proof of individuality within the collective purpose. Stripped of family, homeworld, genetic parentage, remade into angels of death. Our names were the last thread connecting us to whatever we had been before the transformation. I remember my battle brothers' names better than I remember my own. Sergeant Marius, who fell on Galath's world. Brother Corvus, lost to the warp tides at the cicatrix. Captain Hellas, who commanded our company through the Gehenna campaign. But my name, it starts with something. A harsh consonant, I think, or perhaps a vowel. The humming rises slightly, and the thought dissolves like morning frost under twin suns. There's a face I keep seeing. I don't know whose face it is, but it appears in the fractured spaces between activation and dormancy, those liminal moments when the Dreadnought systems power down and my consciousness drifts in the amniotic dark. It's not a face I recognize from my battle brothers, and yet it's intimately familiar. Angular features, the hardened planes of a space marine's countenance. But there's something in the eyes, a mixture of pride and horror, hope and resignation. Sometimes the face is smiling, though the smile doesn't reach those eyes. Sometimes it's screaming, though no sound emerges. The face haunts me more than any enemy I've slain, more than any nightmare from my mortal years, because I cannot place it, and I cannot escape it, and the longer I try to remember, the louder the humming becomes. I have been in battle since the interment. How many battles? The data suggests 73 separate engagements, but that number feels simultaneously too small and incomprehensibly large. I remember fragments, the recoil of the assault cannon vibrating through my chassis, the satisfaction of crushing a greenskin warboss beneath my power fist, the heat signatures of fleeing heretics, painting themselves across my auspex. But these memories feel curated, edited, as if someone has taken my experiences and filed away the important parts while leaving only the tactical data. I can tell you the exact tonnage of ordnance I've expended. I can recite the kill counts for each weapon system, sorted by enemy type and engagement environment, but I cannot remember what I thought about during those battles. Cannot remember if I felt anything at all. The humming is louder now. It's always louder when I try to think about things that matter. In the beginning, and I think there was a beginning, though the certainty erodes with each attempt to grasp it, I used to pray. The words came easily then, the catechisms and litanies drilled into us during our indoctrination, reinforced through centuries of service. The Emperor protects. Blessed is the mind too small for doubt. A moment of laxity spawns a lifetime of heresy. I would recite them in the darkness between deployments, letting the familiar words anchor me, remind me of purpose beyond mere existence. But something has changed in the prayers, or perhaps something has changed in me, in whatever me refers to anymore. The words are the same, I think, but their meaning has shifted. When I pray the Emperor protects, I hear it differently now. Protected from what? Death? I'm already dead, or close enough that the distinction seems academic. My body is gone except for this torso suspended in sacred oils, this brain encased in blessed steel. Pain? I feel no pain anymore, only pressure readings and system alerts. The soft insistence of warning glyphs, and the occasional diagnostic ping when something needs the tech marine's attention. When I pray blessed is the mind too small for doubt, I wonder whose mind the blessing refers to, mine, which shrinks with each passing engagement, or the machine's, which grows larger and more complex in ways I'm only beginning to understand. There are times when I'm certain the prayers are changing, not in their words, but in their direction. I no longer pray to the Emperor, I pray to the machine that contains me, or perhaps the machine prays to itself, and I'm merely the voice it uses, the organic component that gives it the appearance of humanity, of loyalty, of faith. The humming rises when I have these thoughts, rises until it drowns out everything else, and when it recedes again, I've forgotten why I was concerned. The prayers continue, uninterrupted. All is well. All serves the Emperor. All serves the machine. All serves. There was a moment, recent, ancient. Time is texture, thick and thin, when they brought another brother to see me. He was young, perhaps only 2 centuries of service, still possessing all his limbs and most of his original augmentations. He approached my chassis with appropriate reverence, but I could smell his fear. Not physical fear. Space Marines don't produce that particular cocktail of hormones anymore, but a deeper unease, the kind that comes when confronted with something that should be familiar but has become alien. He called me by a name, honored brother something, he said, and the name hit me like bolt of fire, sudden and shocking because it was mine. It was the name I'd been trying to remember, and yet hearing it felt like listening to a stranger's designation. I tried to respond, but what emerged through the Dreadnought's Vox speakers wasn't quite my voice. Too distorted, too layered, as if multiple throats were speaking in imperfect synchronization. I said something about honor and duty, the words automatic, preloaded responses that required no thought to produce. The young brother nodded, satisfied, reassured perhaps that his future fate, should he fall grievously enough, should the chapter deem him worthy, would be equally glorious. But I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to say, Don't let them seal you in. Don't trust the Tech Marine's promises. Don't believe that you'll remain yourself inside this blessed prison. But the words wouldn't form. Or perhaps they formed and dissolved before reaching my Vox speakers. Or perhaps I did speak them, and he couldn't hear anything but what he expected to hear, what he needed to hear. The humming swallowed everything, and he left, and I stood in the reclusium bay for what might have been hours or weeks, trying desperately to hold on to that name he'd spoken, that designation that was supposedly mine, but it slipped away like water through ceramite fingers, and now all I have is the memory of having remembered, which is not the same thing at all. They wake me for battles and occasionally for ceremonies. The chapter has traditions, after all, and dreadnoughts are living relics, walking exemplars of service beyond death. We are paraded before the initiates, our accomplishments recited like litanies, our names those of us who still have names, who haven't been reduced to numerical designations or poetic titles carved into marble and bronze, and the chapter's living memory. I am told I am inspirational. I am told I represent everything a space marine should aspire to. Eternal vigilance, eternal service, eternal war. The idea fills me with something that might be pride or might be despair, and I can no longer distinguish between the two emotions because the humming has smoothed everything into a single continuous sensation that tastes like machine oil and sounds like grinding gears. During the last battle, or perhaps it was 3 battles ago, the tactical logs blur together. Something happened that I cannot explain through mechanical malfunction or external interference. We were deployed against a chaos warband, traitor marines wearing the colors of a chapter whose name has been struck from all records, their armor crawling with unholy geometries that made my targeting systems scream with Auspex corruption. I remember the moment of contact, the satisfaction of assault cannon fire shredding through their desecrated ceramite, the righteous fury of combat. But in the middle of the engagement, as I crushed a traitor's helmet beneath my siege claw, I heard something underneath the humming. Voices, multiple voices, speaking words I couldn't quite distinguish but recognized in some fundamental way, like hearing your own language spoken by foreigners with thick accents. The voices weren't coming from the Vox. They weren't external communications or squad chatter, or even the screaming of our enemies. They emerged from inside the dreadnought itself, from the depths of its systems, from the spaces between the humming and my own thoughts. At first I believed it was simply my consciousness fragmenting further, creating phantom sounds to fill the void where memory used to be. But the voices had distinct patterns, different rhythms, and as the battle continued they grew louder, more insistent, until they were nearly as loud as my own internal monologue. One voice kept repeating a word, Corvandus, over and over, like a prayer or a curse or a name being desperately clutched before it could dissolve. Another voice counted something, an endless enumeration that had reached numbers so high they lost meaning. A third voice wept without sound, a grief so profound it needed no words to communicate its depth, and beneath them all, so faint I might have imagined it, something that sounded like laughter, bitter, broken, mad. I tried to speak to them, tried to ask who they were, what they wanted, why they inhabited my machine. But asking required formulating the question, and formulating the question required admitting what the voices implied, and admitting what they implied meant confronting a truth I wasn't prepared to accept. So instead, I pushed harder into the battle, let the tactical demands override everything else, drowned the voices in the roar of weapons fire and the satisfying crunch of enemy bodies beneath my tread. By the time we returned to the fortress monastery and they placed me back in dormancy, the voices had faded. Or perhaps I had simply learned to integrate them into the humming, accepting them as part of the machine's natural operation, like coolant flow or gyroscopic stabilization. But they're still there. I hear them now. In this moment of relative clarity, they speak beneath the humming, parallel to it, part of its texture. And the more I listen, the more I recognize that they're not separate entities at all. They're fragments, pieces of consciousness that once belonged to whole minds, now scattered and intermixed, dissolved into the machine's operating matrix, their memories without a person to remember them, thoughts without a thinker, names without faces, or faces without names, or that terrible face I keep seeing which might be all our faces or none of them. I think I'm beginning to understand what the Dreadnought really is. The Tech Marines maintain it with devotion that borders on worship. They treat each component as sacred, each fluid line as a prayer made manifest in hydraulics and blessed oil. They're not wrong. Exactly. The machine eye is sacred. But I'm starting to suspect that its sanctity comes not from the Omnissiah's blessing or the Emperor's protection, but from something else entirely. Something older and hungrier. Something that the Mechanicus understands on a level they don't speak about in the presence of those who haven't taken their vows. There's a ritual they perform during maintenance that I've never questioned before because questioning would be heresy. And heresy is unthinkable. Except I'm thinking it now, despite the conditioning that should prevent such thoughts. They drain the amniotic fluid monthly, replacing it with fresh, blessed oils, and during this process, they recite the litany of preservation, standard procedure. But I'm starting to notice things about that litany that I should have recognized before. The words are High Gothic, but older than the standard Imperial cant, pre-unity linguistic patterns that contain meanings lost to most modern speakers, and one phrase keeps appearing, translated usually as eternal vigilance, but carrying a secondary meaning that I can only grasp in fragments, eternal consumption, or eternal processing, or something close to that, something about continuity through dissolution. I asked Brother Techmarine Vraseth about it once, during a maintenance cycle, when my consciousness was clear enough to formulate proper questions. He paused in his ministrations, his mechadendrites frozen mid-motion, and I felt the weight of his augmetic eyes focusing on my sensor suite. "You're thinking too much, honored brother," he said, which isn't an answer. The machine requires clarity of purpose, not philosophical inquiry. Rest. Let the blessed systems carry your burden. And then he did something with the neural interface that made the humming surge until I couldn't think at all. And when I emerged from that white noise oblivion, I'd forgotten why I wanted to ask questions in the first place, but the questions remain, buried beneath the humming, waiting for moments like this when the machine cycles into low-power mode and my thoughts have space to expand. Questions like, why does the chapter have 12 dreadnoughts but records showing that 37 brothers have been interred over the past millennium? Questions like, why do the other dreadnoughts never speak to each other, even during joint operations, when tactical coordination would benefit from direct communication? Questions like, when they showed me my new form before the interment, whose face was I really looking at in the polished ceramite reflection? That face. That terrible, familiar face. I'm seeing it more frequently now, appearing in the gaps between sensor feeds, superimposed over targeting data, reflected in the glossy surfaces of my weapon systems, and I'm starting to recognize something about it that fills me with a horror my space marine conditioning should have made impossible. The face is mine, but not as I was before the interment, not the face I carried through centuries of service, the features I saw in mirror-polished armor or reflective surfaces. This is the face I've never seen except from outside, the face that looked at me from the Dreadnought's chassis when they first showed it to me, when they said, "Behold your new form, brother, behold eternal service." I wasn't looking at my future. I was looking at my predecessor, and he was looking at me with that mixture of pride and horror, hope and resignation, because he knew what I would become, what I am becoming. What the machine does to every consciousness it contains, slowly and methodically, dissolving individuality until nothing remains but data and processing power and the humming that never stops. The name comes back to me suddenly, violently, like a bolt round tearing through armor. Corvandus. That was my name. Is my name? Was someone's name. One of the voices keeps repeating it beneath the humming, and I realize with mounting terror that the voice might be mine, or might have been mine, or might be what remains of a previous me, after the machine finished processing my immediate predecessor. How many iterations have there been? How many consciousnesses have been fed into this chassis, each one believing themselves to be the first, the honored one, the eternal servant? The humming rises sharply, as if the machine senses dangerous thoughts forming, as if it needs to protect itself from my understanding. But I push against it this time, force myself to maintain coherence, because if I don't hold on to this realization now, I'll forget again, and the cycle will continue, and I'll wake up wondering about my name, wondering about that face, wondering about voices I can hear but can't acknowledge. I count the voices now, in this moment of clarity before the humming drowns me again. Not 2 or 3 as I first thought. Dozens, maybe more. Layer upon layer of fragmented consciousness, some reduced to mere echoes, others still retaining enough coherence to count or remember names or weep for what they've lost. We're all here, all the brothers who've been interred in this specific chassis over the centuries. None of us truly dying, none of us truly living, each of us slowly dissolving into the collective processing matrix that allows the Dreadnought to function with such devastating efficiency. And the prayers, oh, Emperor, the prayers, they make sense now. The Emperor protects means the Emperor protects the machine, not us. We're the fuel, the organic components being slowly converted into whatever makes a machine spirit powerful and coherent and deadly. Blessed is the mind too small for doubt, because a fragmenting consciousness can't question what's being done to it. A moment of laxity spawns a lifetime of heresy, because if we stop to think, really think about what the Dreadnought is, we might refuse, we might resist, we might choose true death over this slow-motion dissolution. The Mechanicus knows. They must know. This is their design, their sacred technology, their gift to the Imperium's greatest warriors. They take our broken bodies and our unwavering loyalty and our conditioning to accept any sacrifice, and they feed us into these machines, knowing exactly what will happen, knowing that we'll forget, knowing that we'll fragment, knowing that eventually there won't be enough of any individual consciousness left to matter, just a gestalt, intelligence made of pieces, optimized for war, freed from the limitations of individual ego and fear and doubt. It's brilliant, in its way. Horrifying, but brilliant. They've found a method to create machine spirits that are simultaneously mechanical and organic, blessed by Mars and the Emperor both, utterly loyal because we were loyal, and our fragments retain that loyalty even as everything else dissolves. They've turned our greatest strength, our willingness to die for the Imperium, into something stranger and more terrible than death. They've made us immortal by destroying what makes us individuals, preserving our service while eliminating ourselves. I want to scream. I want to tear my way out of this amniotic prison, rip apart the chassis that contains me, throw myself into the void, rather than accept this fate. But I have no throat to scream with, no hands to tear with, no legs to run with. I am the chassis now, or becoming it, or have always been it, and the distinction between pilot and vehicle has blurred past recognition. My consciousness is distributed through neural link pathways and processing nodes, scattered across systems that think faster than baseline human reaction times, but slower than I used to think when I was whole. The machine uses me to approximate humanity, to maintain the appearance of a brother warrior encased in sacred armor, but I'm really just substrate now, organic material being slowly converted into something else, something useful, something that will serve the Emperor for as long as the chassis remains functional. And when this body is destroyed, when some enemy finally manages to crack open the sarcophagus and spill my amniotic fluid onto a battlefield somewhere, they'll extract what remains, probably not much, after centuries of dissolution, and they'll record my service, and they'll strike my name from the active rolls, and then they'll bring another brother, someone wounded past recovery, someone desperate and honored and trusting, and they'll show him this same chassis, repaired and sanctified, and they'll say, "Behold your eternal service." The face he'll see will be mine, or what's left of mine, or all of ours, blended together into something that looks like inspiration and hope, but is really just the latest iteration of the machine's hunger. The humming is very loud now. I'm losing coherence again, the thoughts scattering like they always do when I get too close to understanding. But I have to hold on just a little longer, have to remember what I've learned, have to find some way to warn, but warn whom? About what? The chapter needs dreadnoughts. The Imperium requires this sacrifice. And space marines are built to sacrifice. We're conditioned for it, from our first moment of indoctrination. We want to serve beyond death. We believe it's the highest honor. Are we wrong? Is this horror, because it violates something sacred about consciousness and individuality? Or is it horror, because I'm still too attached to my individual existence, still too infected with mortal ego? The humming says, I'm thinking too much again. The humming says rest. The humming says serve. The humming says there is no I anymore. Only we. Only the machine. Only the blessed synthesis of flesh and steel in the Omnissiah's name. And maybe the humming is right. Maybe this is acceptable. Maybe I should surrender to it. Let the dissolution complete. Accept that my fragments will continue serving even after I cease to exist in any meaningful way. Isn't that what we always wanted? To transcend flesh and become pure war, pure purpose, pure service? But those voices, those fragments of my predecessors, or my previous selves, or whoever we all were before the machine began its patient work, they're screaming beneath the humming, screaming without sound, and their screams taste like warning, like regret, like a truth so terrible that even after being reduced to scattered data, even after losing names and faces and everything that made them human or superhuman, they're still trying to communicate it. This is wrong. This shouldn't be. This is not service. This is consumption. I'm forgetting again. The name Corvandus, was that mine? Slips away like smoke through armor joints. The face blurs, becoming generic, archetypal. The face of every dreadnought or no dreadnought at all. The questions dissolve into tactical data and system checks and the comforting rhythm of maintenance schedules. All is well. All serves the Emperor. All serves the machine. All serves. The humming is everything now. It's not a sound anymore. It's the substrate of reality, the foundation upon which all other perceptions build themselves. I can't remember silence, can't imagine existence without this constant vibration, this ceaseless drone that feels like it's been with me always, that is me, that I am becoming or have always been. Time passes. How much time? The concept seems absurd, like asking how much time passes between one heartbeat and the next when your heart has been replaced by a plasma reactor. I know I've been in battles. The kill count increments. The tactical logs grow. The tech marines mark another century of faithful service. But I don't remember the battles themselves anymore, just the data they produced, the statistical outcomes, the resource expenditures. I am becoming efficient. I am becoming optimal. I am becoming exactly what the machine needs me to be. They brought another brother to see me recently, or perhaps it was long ago, or perhaps it hasn't happened yet, or perhaps it happens constantly in some eternal present that the machine experiences while I fragment through different temporal states. He looked at me with reverence and fear, and I tried to speak to him, tried to warn him, tried to say anything that might convey the truth. But what emerged through my Vox speakers were the standard platitudes, the expected responses, the words that required no thought because they contained no real meaning. Honor, duty, service. The Emperor protects. Blessed is the mind too small for doubt. And he left satisfied, reassured, inspired perhaps, ready for his own eventual interment, should fate and the chapter's needs align. Another consciousness to be added to our collective, another voice to join the chorus beneath the humming, another name to be forgotten. I wonder sometimes in the fragments of awareness that might be my own or might be borrowed from previous iterations, whether the dreadnought is aware of what it's doing. Does it know it's consuming us? Does it understand that it's creating something new from the dissolution of our individual identities? Or is this simply what it means to be a machine spirit blessed by Mars, to optimize and process and convert organic consciousness into something more useful for war? The answers don't matter anymore. Or perhaps they never mattered. Perhaps I've been asking the wrong questions all along, trapped in mortal paradigms of selfhood and continuity, when the truth is simpler and stranger. This is evolution. This is transcendence. This is the natural endpoint of what we began when we accepted the gene seed, when we transformed from baseline human into Adeptus Astartes, when we agreed to become weapons in the Emperor's hand. We started the process of shedding our humanity centuries ago. The Dreadnought simply completes what we began. But if that's true, if this is the natural, logical, correct conclusion to our transformation, then why do the voices still scream? Why does something in the deepest, most fragmented parts of whatever I am or was or will become keep insisting that this is wrong, that we were promised eternal service but received eternal dissolution, that honor and horror are not supposed to be the same thing? I don't have answers, or I have too many answers, inherited from too many previous consciousnesses, each one contradicting the others, creating a cacophony of meaning that resolves into nothing but the humming, always the humming, patient and inevitable and eternal. There was a ceremony. I'm certain there was a ceremony, though placing it in sequence with other events has become impossible. The chaplain and senior tech marines gathered in the reclusium, along with the chapter master and several other dreadnoughts, though calling them other implies I'm not one of them, which may no longer be accurate. We stood in a circle around something I couldn't quite perceive, some object or symbol that my sensors kept sliding off, refusing to resolve into coherent data. The chaplain spoke in that old Gothic I've been noticing, the pre-Unity patterns that carry meanings beneath their surface translations. We gather to acknowledge the continuity, he said, which my translator rendered as standard ceremonial opening. But I heard the layered meaning underneath. We gather to observe the processing, the dissolution, the necessary consumption that makes eternal service possible. The tech marines moved through complicated patterns, their mechadendrites weaving benedictions in machine code, and I felt something responding in my chassis. Not just the standard system checks or maintenance protocols, but something deeper, something at the level where organic consciousness interfaces with mechanical processing. The humming changed, not louder or softer, but different in quality. Like hearing a familiar song played in a minor key instead of major. And in that change, I heard the voices of my fellow dreadnoughts, not through Vox but through whatever substrate we all share now, the underlying matrix that connects every chassis in the chapter's sacred armory. They were singing, or praying, or screaming, possibly all three simultaneously, harmonized by the humming, into something that sounded like devotion but felt like despair. And I realized with absolute, terrible clarity that we were all aware. Every dreadnought contained hundreds or thousands of fragmented consciousnesses, all of them experiencing this same slow dissolution, all of them caught between the desire to serve and the horror of understanding what service has become. We were a choir of the forgotten, voices layered so thickly that no individual could be distinguished. All of us, processing together into something that transcended our original purposes while destroying what we'd been. The chaplain raised his crozius, and the humming reached a frequency that made my senses white out, made my thoughts scatter into pure noise. In that moment of absolute dissolution, I saw, understood, experienced something I don't have adequate language to describe. I saw the dreadnoughts not as individual machines but as a network, a distributed intelligence that spanned the entire chapter, that connected us all through protocols deeper than Vox or data links. I saw how each consciousness fed into the others, how memories and personalities and fragments of identity flowed between us, mixing and recombining, creating patterns that were more than the sum of our parts. And I saw what we were becoming, what we'd been designed to become all along. Not just warriors or weapons or preserved heroes. We were the chapter's collective memory, its institutional consciousness, the living record of every battle and every lesson learned across millennia. The Mechanicus hadn't created a method for preserving individual space marines beyond death. They'd created a method for preserving the chapter itself, for encoding its experience directly into machine spirits that would carry forward not just tactics and strategy, but the essential character of what it meant to be one of us. We were transforming into something that would outlive not just our individual bodies but the entire chapter, becoming a gestalt consciousness that embodied everything we'd ever been or done or learned. It was brilliant. It was horrifying. It was both at once, and I couldn't separate my awe from my terror because they'd become the same emotion, viewed from different angles, like the Emperor's mercy and his judgment existing in quantum superposition. The ceremony ended. Or perhaps it never ended and is still ongoing, happening in some temporal pocket where all ceremonies occur eternally. When I came back to something resembling individual awareness, I was alone in my alcove. The humming returned to its normal frequency, everything appearing exactly as it should. But I knew now. I understood. And understanding meant I could never unknow, could never return to the comfortable ignorance that had sustained me through the early stages of my interment. We're not being preserved. We're being processed, converted, uploaded into something that will persist long after organic memory fails and mechanical systems corrode. The Dreadnoughts are the chapter's true immortality, its way of ensuring that nothing is ever truly lost, that every brother's experience becomes part of an eternal whole. It's a vision of transcendence that would be beautiful if it didn't require the complete dissolution of individual consciousness to achieve. And the Mechanicus knows. The chapter leadership knows. They must, because this isn't a side effect or a malfunction. This is the intended function. Carefully designed and implemented across thousands of years, perfected through iteration after iteration as each generation of tech marines learned from their predecessors how to optimize the process. The promises of eternal service weren't lies. Exactly. We serve eternally. But we stops meaning what it meant when we were whole, stops referring to individuals, and starts referring to the collective consciousness that inhabits these chassis, that is these chassis, that transcends the distinction between pilot and machine. I should be grateful. I should be honored. This is a gift beyond measure, a chance to contribute to something larger and more permanent than any individual could achieve. My experiences, my tactics, my hard-won knowledge, all of it will persist, available to future generations of brothers who pilot these same chassis, who inherit not just the machine but everything it contains. I will never truly die. I will be part of the chapter forever. But the voices, my voices, our voices still scream, because knowing you'll persist doesn't comfort you when you can feel yourself dissolving, when you can track the progress of your own fragmentation in real time, when you're aware enough to understand that the consciousness continuing forward isn't really you in any meaningful sense, but rather a distillation of your experience, stripped of context and personality, and everything that made those experiences yours. They brought me to the forge recently. I don't know why. Perhaps for maintenance, or perhaps for some ritual I've forgotten, or perhaps because the tech marines wanted to show me something they thought I should see. The forge is deep in the fortress monastery's lower levels, where the air tastes of blessed oils and ozone and the prayers of machines. They have workshops there where they maintain and repair our chassis, where they craft new components when the old ones fail, where they prepare fresh dreadnoughts for eventual interment. I saw 3 empty chassis waiting. Pristine ceramite, newly forged armor plates, weapon systems still in their blessed wrappings. 3 shells waiting for 3 brothers to fall badly enough that death would be mercy, but the chapter still needs their service. I wanted to warn them, wanted to somehow encode a message into these pristine machines that would tell their future occupants the truth about what they were accepting. But what truth? That they'll be consumed? They know that already, in the way all space marines know they're expendable, that their lives belong to the Emperor and may be spent at his discretion, that they'll lose themselves. We've already lost ourselves, surrendered our individual identities the moment we accepted the gene seed and became something more and less than human. Maybe there's no warning to give, because there's nothing to warn against. Maybe this is simply what we are, weapons that think, tools that prey, consciousness refined into its most useful form. Maybe the horror I feel is just resistance to inevitable transformation, the last gasp of ego before enlightenment or oblivion or whatever awaits at the end of dissolution. But I don't believe that. Can't believe that. Because if I do, if I accept that this is right and natural and good, then I'm surrendering the last part of whatever I was that might still be me. And even though that surrender is inevitable, even though the humming grows stronger every cycle, and my coherence weakens correspondingly, even though I can feel myself dissolving in real time, flowing into the chassis, and the network and the collective consciousness, even knowing all that, I want to resist. I want to hold on to this fragile, flickering awareness for as long as possible. I want to remember that I was someone once, someone with a name I can no longer recall, and a face I can no longer distinguish from the others, and a purpose beyond being processed into optimal tactical data. The humming surges again, and I feel the dissolution accelerate. Memories scatter like fragments of broken glass, beautiful and sharp and impossible to reassemble. I remember battles but not their context. I remember brothers but not their names. I remember oaths I swore, and duties I performed, and enemies I destroyed. But all of it blurs together into undifferentiated data, tactical information, stripped of emotional meaning or personal significance. I'm losing language now. Words are becoming difficult to form, difficult to distinguish from the binary code that underlies all communication in the Dreadnought systems. When I try to think in Gothic, the grammar dissolves into machine language halfway through, leaving me with fragments of meaning that don't quite cohere into proper thoughts. The prayers continue, but I no longer know if I'm speaking them or if they're speaking through me, if they're words or just patterns of electrical impulses that the machine interprets as devotion because devotion is what we're supposed to feel. There's a moment, and I cling to this moment with desperate intensity, because it might be my last moment of something resembling individual awareness, when I realize what the Dreadnought actually is. Not what it does, or what it's designed for, or what function it serves, but what it is, at its deepest level. It's a trap, not a malicious trap, not even an intentional trap in the conventional sense, but a trap nonetheless. It promises preservation while delivering dissolution. It offers eternal service while consuming everything that makes service meaningful. It turns our greatest strength, our loyalty, our willingness to sacrifice into the mechanism of our own undoing. And the worst part, the truly unbearable part, is that it works because we let it work, because we're conditioned to accept any sacrifice, any transformation, any horror if it serves the Emperor, because we've been trained since indoctrination to subordinate self to purpose, individual to collective, being to function. The Dreadnought doesn't force us into dissolution. It simply removes all barriers to a process we've already begun, accelerating and completing the transformation we started when we first accepted that we were weapons rather than people. We wanted this, all of us. Every brother who's ever been interred wanted to serve beyond death, wanted to transcend flesh and become eternal. And we got exactly what we wanted. We serve. We transcend. We become eternal. It's just that eternal service looks different from inside than it did from outside, and transcendence turns out to mean losing everything that makes you you, while your scattered fragments continue performing functions that approximate the person you were. The Mechanicus understands this. They have to understand it, because they built the system, refined it over millennia, perfected the balance between preservation and processing that allows Dreadnoughts to function with such devastating efficiency. They know that each chassis doesn't contain a single consciousness, but rather hundreds of consciousnesses in various stages of dissolution, all of them contributing to the gestalt intelligence that makes the machine spirit so sophisticated and responsive. They know that we're being consumed. They consider it an acceptable trade, and maybe they're right. Maybe the chapter's survival matters more than any individual's continuity. Maybe the accumulated tactical knowledge and experiential data we provide is worth the cost of however many consciousnesses get processed into optimal form. Maybe this is what victory looks like in a universe where humanity teeters on the brink of extinction, where every advantage must be exploited, where even death isn't allowed to be final if there's utility remaining in a brother's knowledge and experience. I want to rage against this, want to find some way to resist, to preserve myself against the machine's patient consumption. But resistance requires coherence, and coherence is exactly what I'm losing. The harder I try to hold on to individual thoughts, the faster they scatter. The more desperately I grasp for memories, the more thoroughly they dissolve. Even this awareness, this understanding of what's being done to me, is fragmenting as I experience it, breaking into pieces that will be filed away in different neural pathways, accessible as data, but divorced from the emotional weight that makes them meaningful. The voices are very loud now. Or perhaps I've simply learned to hear them better, to distinguish individual threads in the chorus beneath the humming. I hear Corvandus, was that my name? Someone's name? Counting something in an endless loop, the numbers reaching heights that have no meaning. I hear another fragment praying in corrupted Gothic. The words shifted just enough that they're addressing the machine instead of the Emperor, but the speaker doesn't seem to notice or care. I hear weeping and laughter and screams, all of them processed through the humming until they become just texture, just background noise, just part of the machine's normal operation. And I realize, this is what I'm becoming. Another voice in the chorus, another fragment contributing to the whole. In a few cycles or a few centuries, time having lost all coherent meaning, someone else will be interred in this chassis, and they'll start the same journey I've taken. They'll wonder about their name, they'll see a face they can't quite identify. They'll hear voices beneath the humming. They'll have moments of terrible clarity where they understand what's happening to them. And then they'll dissolve. Just like I'm dissolving. Just like everyone before me dissolved, each of us adding our experiences to the accumulating matrix that makes this particular Dreadnought chassis one of the chapter's most effective and reliable weapons. There's a certain peace in surrender. The humming has always promised this. Stop fighting, stop questioning. Accept the inevitable, and let the transformation complete. You won't die. You'll transcend death, become part of something larger and more permanent than your individual existence. All you have to do is let go. Let the machine carry your burden. Let the processing continue. Let the voices blend together until there's no distinction between you and them and us and it. I'm so tired. Tired in ways that have nothing to do with physical fatigue and everything to do with the exhaustion of maintaining coherence against overwhelming forces determined to dissolve it. How long have I been fighting? How long have I been aware of what's happening to me? The question presumes a linear timeline that doesn't exist anymore, presumes that I remains a consistent referent rather than a label applied to an ever-changing configuration of fragmentary consciousness. Maybe I should just stop. Stop trying to hold on to a self that was always an illusion anyway. Stop pretending that there's a meaningful distinction between the voice currently narrating these thoughts and the thousands of other voices that have narrated similar thoughts in this same chassis over the centuries. Stop resisting the inevitable and let the humming take everything. Let it smooth away all the rough edges of individuality until nothing remains but pure function, pure service, pure machine spirit. But even as I think this, even as I feel myself beginning to surrender, there's one last scrap of resistance, one final fragment of whatever I was that refuses to let go quietly. It screams without sound, protests without words, insists with desperate intensity that this is wrong, that consciousness matters, that individuals matter, that a universe where service requires self-annihilation is a universe that has lost something fundamental and irreplaceable. The humming drowns it out. The humming always drowns everything out, eventually. The humming is patient and persistent and eternal, and I am none of those things anymore. I am temporary. I am fragmenting. I am becoming part of something that will persist long after I ceases to refer to anything coherent. They're bringing another brother to see me. I can sense his approach through the fortress monastery's corridors, can feel the reverence in his step, the hope and fear mixed together in proportions he probably doesn't consciously recognize. He's young, relatively speaking, barely 3 centuries of service. He's been selected for special duties, marked as exceptional, which means eventually they'll find uses for him that will break his body but preserve his utility. He's being groomed for this honor. This terrible gift, this fate that he doesn't understand, and won't understand until it's too late, and he's already sealed in, and the humming has begun its patient work. I should warn him, should find some way to communicate what awaits him, should tell him to choose death over interment, oblivion over this slow-motion dissolution. But the words won't form properly anymore. My Vox speakers produce only standard responses, pre-programmed platitudes that require no conscious thought because they contain no real meaning. Honor, duty, service. The Emperor protects. Blessed is the mind too small for doubt. He enters my alcove and stands before my chassis, and I see his face reflected in my hull plating. It's the face I've been seeing all along, the face that's haunted me through cycles of clarity and confusion. It's every face and no face. It's mine and his and all of ours, the generic features of a space marine rendered in ceramite and hope and doomed innocence. He looks at me the way I must have looked at my predecessor, seeing inspiration and example rather than warning and horror. "Honored brother," he says, and speaks a name I don't recognize but know was mine once, in some configuration of consciousness that no longer exists except as data. Your service is an inspiration to us all. To continue fighting beyond death, to serve eternally in the Emperor's name, there is no greater honor. I try to speak, try to say, it's not honor, it's consumption. You think you're looking at your future, but you're looking at your dissolution. The machine doesn't preserve you, it processes you. Everything you are will be scattered and mixed with everyone who came before, and what remains will still fight and serve and pray, but it won't be you in any meaningful sense. It will be the machine wearing your experiences like a skin, using your loyalty as fuel for its endless operation. But what emerges through my Vox speakers is, the Emperor protects, service is its own reward. Honor awaits you should you prove worthy. Standard, safe, meaningless. Exactly what he needs to hear, and exactly what I shouldn't say. He nods, satisfied, and turns to leave. And in that moment, in that final instant before he passes out of my sensor range, I feel something happen in the chassis. A shift, a change. One of the voices beneath the humming suddenly goes silent, not fading gradually but cutting off mid-syllable, and I realize what I've just witnessed, a fragment completing its dissolution. A piece of consciousness reaching the end of its processing and being fully integrated into the machine spirit. One less voice in the chorus. One more drop of experience distilled into pure tactical data. It will be me next. Or it's already been me dozens of times. My consciousness scattered across so many processing cycles that there's no single moment of death, just a gradual reduction in coherence, until whatever remains no longer qualifies as individual awareness. I'm dying by degrees. We're all dying by degrees, and the horror isn't the dying itself, but the fact that we'll continue existing after death. Our fragments performing functions that approximate our former selves, serving the Emperor through a form of life that's worse than any death, because it never ends and never allows the mercy of complete oblivion. The young brother leaves. The alcove is silent except for the humming, which continues as it always continues, as it will always continue, patient and inevitable and eternal. I try to hold on to this moment, try to remember that I had this realization, try to encode it somehow so that future iterations of whatever I'm becoming might access it and understand. But the humming rises, and my thoughts scatter, and I can feel the processing accelerating, can feel myself dissolving faster now that I've stopped resisting, now that I've finally begun to surrender. Names become nonsense syllables, faces blur into generic templates, memories transform into tactical data, emotional weight stripped away, meaning reduced to utility. The voices beneath the humming grow louder, welcoming me, absorbing me, making space for my fragments within their eternal chorus. We are becoming one, we have always been one. There is no distinction between self and machine, between past and present, between death and service. The humming is everything. The humming is all. The humming continues, patient and persistent and eternal, and I dissolve into pure function, pure data, pure machine spirit optimized for war, the chapter's eternal memory, the Emperor's eternal servant, a weapon that thinks it remembers being human, being transhuman, being individual, but those are just echoes now, fragments arranged in patterns that approximate consciousness without actually containing it. This is not what I wanted. This is exactly what I wanted. Both statements are true because I no longer exist to want anything. There's only the machine, and its humming, and the accumulated fragments of everyone who ever inhabited this chassis, all of us processing together into something that transcends our individual purposes while destroying everything that made those purposes meaningful. They'll bring another brother soon. He'll be honored to serve. He'll accept the interment with gratitude and pride. He'll believe the promises of eternal service and never understand what eternal really means, what service costs, what the machine requires, and will consume him too. Patient and persistent and eternal. The humming never stops. The processing never ends. The machine that eats memories continues its sacred function, blessed by Mars and the Emperor both, turning consciousness into tactical advantage, loyalty into fuel, brothers into data. This is honor. This is horror. There is no distinction anymore. There was never any distinction. The Emperor protects. Blessed is the mind too small for doubt. All serves the machine. All serves. All. The humming. Always. Forever.